Is Israel prevailing in its war against Iran as the mainstream media is telling everybody in the West?
No, Israel's in serious trouble. I listened to President Trump not too long ago say that Israel is winning. And of course, this is the mantra in the mainstream media. But the question you have to ask yourself is, what does winning mean? It's a meaningless comment by itself. And the way you assess whether a country is winning a war is you ask yourself the question, what are the goals and what is the strategy that that state has for achieving those goals? And Israel has three stated goals here. One is to eliminate the nuclear capability of Iran, their ability to produce nuclear weapons. And this is all about enrichment. The second goal is regime change. And the third goal, which is articulated by President Trump himself, is unconditional surrender. Of course, if you get unconditional surrender, that takes care of the first two goals. But these are the three goals. Then the question you have to ask yourself is, what is Israel's theory of victory? Tell us how they're going to do this. Well, with regard to the first goal, which is eliminating Iran's nuclear capability, it's clear they can't do that by themselves. They admit that. And that's why they're begging the United States to come in. And Trump is pondering whether to help them. But I would submit that even if Trump comes in, we're not going to eliminate Iran's ability to develop nuclear weapons. Then there's the business of regime change. We do not have a single recorded example in history of a state causing regime change with an air campaign. Remember, we had to invade Iraq to get regime change. We couldn't do it from the air, and we would have to invade Iran to get regime change. And nobody in their right mind is talking about invading Iran. And in terms of unconditional surrender, this is a laughable argument, right? We've put the Iranians in a position where we are threatening their very survival as a state. They're going to fight to the last person. They're not going to submit to unconditional surrender. So what you see here is that the Israelis have no way of achieving the goals they've set out for themselves. And even if we come in, that's not going to solve the problem. And in the meantime, Israel is being pounded with ballistic missiles from Iran. It's running out of its own missiles to knock down those Iranian ballistic missiles. And it's begging the United States to send air defenses to the Middle East to help pull the Israelis' chestnuts out of the fire. You call this winning? In my world, it's called losing.
So Israel's theory of victory must be Netanyahu begs and the donor class demands that Donald Trump get involved and we start dropping 30,000-pound bombs.
It doesn't solve the problem.
Right.
And the media is full of stories these days showing to you that, dropping 30,000-pound bombs on Fordow is just not going to solve the problem. You probably cannot destroy the centrifuges down in the bottom of that mountain that are producing the enriched uranium. You just can't do it, even with American bombs. But let's assume I'm wrong, and you can destroy those centrifuges. Almost everybody agrees when you look at how extensive, how comprehensive the Iranian nuclear program is, that they can easily rebuild that program in a year or two, and we'll be back to where we started. So there's just no way that even with the United States coming into the fight that we can eliminate Iran's nuclear capability.
Professor Mearsheimer, President Trump has insisted that Israel owns Iran's sky. Is there any accuracy to that Israel has destroyed Iran's air defenses and Israel now controls Iran's sky?
I don't think so. It's very hard to figure out exactly what's happening here, in large part because the mainstream media coverage is so terrible. But it appears that what has happened here is the Israelis have not penetrated into Iran and destroyed Iran's air defense systems, their ground-based air defenses. You remember when the Israelis first attacked, this was on June 13th, and for about the first 2 days, everybody was puzzled by the fact that the Iranian air defenses were just not in the fight. This was really quite amazing. So the question is, what's happening here? My sense is that what the Israelis are doing is they're using drones, and they're firing missiles from places like Iraq into Iran. And they're doing all the damage that they're doing. And I don't want to make light of the damage that's being done to Iran with cruise missiles and ballistic missiles and other kinds of missiles that are fired from outside of Iran's border or barely inside Iran's border. But I think the argument that the Israeli Air Force completely controls the skies over all of Iran is not true. You would have needed a big battle, a big air battle against Iranian air defenses for this to be the case. The Iranians had significant amounts of assets on the ground that had to be dealt with, and there's no evidence that that fight took place. So I don't think they control the skies over Iran.
What is the level and depth of the trouble that they're in? What is Israeli society, politics, economy, culture like today?
Well, the thing you want to remember is that the Israelis depend very heavily on the idea or the notion that they have military superiority over everybody in the region, that they are invincible. And if they start a war and they lose that war, they don't win that war, and indeed it looks like Iran wins the war, this is a significant defeat for Israeli deterrence. It's just something that's almost unthinkable. They started this war thinking that they were going to win a relatively easy victory, and they were going to do to Iran what has been done to Syria. But that's not going to happen. The Iranians are going to stay in this fight. You want to remember that Iran fought against Iraq for 8 years, from 1980 to 1988.
Well, in those days, we were on Iraq's side, right?
That's correct. That's correct. So the Iranians, I think, will stay in the fight. And I don't think Israel can maintain this fight over the long term.
Does their enormous international airport, the Ben Gurion Airport, is it operative?
No, I think it's shut down at this point in time. I don't think that any airline would fly in there, even if the airport were open, for fear that a ballistic missile would come in and destroy the aircraft. This is one of the principal problems that the Israelis face. This is taking a huge toll on their economy. People can't go to work. The airport's closed. And you want to remember that the Iranians are targeting Haifa, which is an important Israeli port. And ships are not going to be willing to go into that port for fear they'll be blown up by a ballistic missile coming in from Iran. If you look at the newspapers, the mainstream media newspapers over the past 2 days, more and more newspapers are talking about the problems that we would face if we go after Fordow, or more generally, if we get into the war. And furthermore, more and more newspapers are talking about the fact that Israel is in deep trouble. My comments about Israel's losing the war at this point would not have resonated with many people last week. But today is a different story. I think if you look at the mainstream media, people are beginning to sense that the Israelis are in trouble. By the way, you want to remember here, this is a very important point. We fought a 30-day war against the Houthis. You remember when President Trump declared war against the Houthis? And
right. Was there unconditional surrender then?
No. After 30 days, we quit.
Right.
And by the way, the main reason we quit is that we were burning up valuable ammunition that we didn't want to burn up. And it was all to no effect because we were not defeating the Houthis. But I would ask you this question. If we couldn't beat the Houthis, why do you think that either we or the Israelis can bring Iran to its knees?
آنچه در مورد ما میگویند